Welcome to the Oxygen Advantage podcast with your host, Oxygen Advantage founder Patrick McKeown. With the Oxygen Advantage podcast, we aim to show how functional breathing is an essential part of a healthy and well-balanced lifestyle. Each episode, we meet experts in their field from around the world and talk about their lives, their experiences, and how they learned the importance of breathing. Join us and get inspired. Get the Oxygen Advantage.
Well, if you're talking about breathing, and it's very seldom that I actually get to have a podcast with an Olympian and one that has delivered and brought home a silver. So welcome, Adam Burgess. This is really to get an insight. And yeah, it's great to have a chat. So how are you?
Yeah, really good. Thank you. Thanks for having me on. Looking forward to this.
Great stuff. Where do you live, by the way?
Right now I'm in Stone, which is near Stoke-on-Trent in Staffordshire. I actually live in London now, at the Whitewater Centre where I train every day.
And that's your full-time occupation. Obviously, you're a professional canoeist.
Yeah, full-time canoe slalom athlete, and now, teaching breathing on the side as well.
Great. I'd love to know even your background. Like, how did you get into it? What age are you, by the way?
I'm 32 now.
Okay.
I started this sport when I was 10, almost 11 years old. I actually visited my school where I started this morning, and it was interesting being back. I remember vividly the classroom I was in, who I sat next to, how it all went about, and there was an opportunity to try the sport, and there was only a small group. I think 8 children were allowed to start, and my permission slip that had to get signed by my mum, that was just crumpled up in the bottom of my bag, and I didn't get to do it. And I was quite disappointed because I'd tried it before with the Cub Scouts as well. So I knew I was going to enjoy it. And then about 4 weeks in, one of the children dropped out and another opportunity came up. And it was my form teacher, Mrs. Williamson, said, "Oh, someone's dropped out of the canoeing. Would anyone like to join?" And I can remember just raising my hand. It was, such a simple action, which at the time it felt so, small and not that significant. And here I am, 21 years later, turned it into a career, stood on an Olympic podium. Kind of blows my mind a little bit. The message I was trying to get across this morning at the school was, I was one of them and they've got the same opportunities that I've had. And I was just brave enough, to put my hand up and try something new. And it's something I really believe in, especially for young people, just try things. You got no idea where it could take you.
It's amazing too, but there's a couple of other things in it. You kind of knew it was for you, even though you may not have known why. So it was almost intuitive. But we don't always listen to
I think maybe I spend too much time with yogis these days, and it's a little bit woo-woo, but I think maybe it was the universe just giving me that second nudge, like
woo about it. Listen to Richard Branson. Listen to any of the individuals at a business level who have achieved great things, because we never have all the data. When we're making a decision, we have only so much information, and we also have to make a decision without perfect information, and part of that is going to be gut instinct. I've relied on it too. It got me into breathing, it got you into canoeing. And then, of course, chance favors the brave. Something happened.
Yeah.
It's life, isn't it?
You say that about instincts and breathing as well, because over the years as well, I've had a few nudges. This is something you should pay attention to, and I don't regret anything. But it took me till I was 25 to really start this work. But there were signs along the way, and I'm sure we'll get into that a bit later as well.
And can I just ask, what came into your mind the first couple of times you heard about breathing? Because it's often something I wonder, like, why on earth? Now, I forgot to mention you're an Oxygen Advantage instructor. So you obviously took a deep dive. You didn't just do breathing exercise to help with your sport, but you've actually learned to be an instructor to be able to pass it on to other people. What did you think? Because sometimes I think people have a different perception of breathing. So the first couple of times you heard about it, what was going on in your mind?
Yeah, I guess I've got a few stories to share on that. Really, I can remember early on, out for a run with one of my coaches, and I can remember asking how I should be breathing. And I can remember asking if I should be using my nose or my mouth, or nose in, mouth out, like we hear from our PE teachers. And I can remember him saying, "Oh, just use your mouth. It's the biggest airway. Get the air in and out." I can remember struggling, particularly in the winter, feeling like I couldn't get a full breath. The way that I understand that now, I think I had a high functional residual capacity. I probably had a problem with exhalation, actually, rather than inhalation. I was inhaling from an already quite full lung. A narrow airway because I was using the mouth, the cold air in particular. And I did sports science at university. And early on, one of the labs that we did was it was a breathing function test, and all of my classmates were expecting me to smash it because I was the athlete. And I can't remember the exact numbers now, but I had these piddly little lungs, is what the test said. And yeah, I can remember just like thinking like that's a bit curious, and didn't really go on to look into it any deeper than that at the time, sadly. Which is interesting now because I've actually done further study as well since, and I worked one-to-one with Martin McPhilmy out in Perth, and him and I went to the same university and did the same lab and had completely different experience of it. His numbers were off the charts, and that started his interest in breath, right? So yeah, it was interesting, and it was probably around then as well that I brought it up with a sports medicine doctor, and was given an inhaler, told I had exercise-induced asthma, which I now believe was probably misdiagnosed, potentially as ILO, the exercise-induced laryngeal obstruction. I was just bad at breathing, and yeah, it took me until I was 25 to really start to get a handle on this stuff. And what it was a shoulder injury. So it was a mechanical thing for me, that led to me making the change finally. And I had a physio who suggested that I was breathing too much from my upper chest. Now, I didn't really get much more support other than that. And I know this physio now, she's brilliant. But we've spoken about it since, and she knows that I've done a lot of training in this area now. And she said, yeah, I didn't really know how to, like, what else to tell you other than that, really. Try and breathe a bit lower down from your diaphragm. And I remember mentioning it to my mum, and she suggested that I went to her yoga class, which I subsequently did. And yeah, I got my ass kicked by my mum and all her friends. And I think as an athlete, particularly in a sport like mine, high adrenaline, extreme sport to some degree, I think you could think yoga is like way too simple. Like, why am I doing this? But the fact I was so humbled in there, I think it could have gone one or two ways. It could have been, well, this is nonsense. Or the response I actually had was, wow, like there's really something in this. There's something to learn here. And yeah, began a yoga practice and was quite fortunate that, yeah, very, very early on, one of my yoga teachers suggested I read The Oxygen Advantage. And that kind of started a bit of a deep dive really from that point on to learn about breath. And it wasn't just the shoulder that got fixed. There was other areas of my life were improving, sleeping better, recovering better from training. And yeah, bit by bit, it's kind of, the fascination just grows, to be honest, still like 7 years later. I think, back then there wasn't really too much out there. And now it's really booming, loads of new research. It's a really exciting time. And I think it's such a fascinating area of research.
There's and a couple of points there that are pretty brilliant. You achieve great heights anyway, even though your breathing was holding you back, but
Yes.
athletes can do that.
Yeah, 100%.
because they have buckets of willpower and determination. They're tough individuals. So they can override, factors, limiting factors. I often wonder, does it catch up? I haven't figured that one out, because could athletes then, if they have dysfunctional breathing or poor breathing, are they more prone to injury, which is possible? Are they more prone to overtraining, which is possible and happens? And could it lead to, just pushing it that bit too far on an extreme level, leading to maybe chronic fatigue, which I've seen as well with athletes?
Yeah, this is something I think about quite a lot, and particularly I think in the latter end of my career, it's going to be, I think I've got 2 more Olympics in me, which is 8 more years. So I'll be 40 when the Olympics rolls around to Brisbane in 2032, and I feel by that point it's a show of longevity. Look what you can do if you look after yourself.
Totally.
And I think breathing better for me was a bit of a gateway into really just focusing on health and longevity. In general, my interest in this, actually, a lot of it's outside of sport. I want to hopefully live to a ripe old age and still be able to move, and keep my my brain functioning well, all of that. So
totally.
but I think as I get older, I think it will become, certainly like the messages that I'm getting across and the reasons why I'm doing it will shift slightly.
Did you find, so you talked about your sleep improving, your recovery improving. Did your degree of breathlessness during physical exercise get easier? In other words, did you find that you could push yourself harder without the same intensity of breathing?
Yeah, I'd say so. So obviously when I first started this work, it was I was trying to improve my ability to nasal breathe during exercise, which a lot of people listening to this podcast have probably tried it and experienced that first time, and it can feel impossible, right? And sometimes you've just got to take one step backwards to take a real leap forwards. I think we adapt amazingly fast, to be honest. To be able to do it in that sort of zone 1, zone 2 level of exercise. But in my experience, I've been able to take it way beyond. I remember I impressed a exercise physiologist once when I went to, I was having some checks done on my heart, everything was fine, but performed a VO2 max test. And afterwards he was like, "You were just nasal breathing that whole time, right?" So we took it right up to 85-90% of VO2 max, and was maintaining nasal breathing, which for me, certainly when I started this, I thought that wouldn't be possible. I was like, maybe I can take this up to like zone 1 and 2, which actually in my sport isn't super relevant. We're the 90 to 100 seconds event, so it's like very high intensity. I wouldn't say that I'm nasal breathing the entire time, but if you see me take a mouth inhale, then I'm in trouble. I've lost a bit of control, and I'm really like attuned to that now and present. And actually, if that happens, I'll probably give it a forceful exhale and try to return to nasal breathing, and probably slow my pace down a little bit. And it's amazing. It starts to make so many things make sense from like previous in my career. I've always been interested in the aesthetics and the technical side of canoe slalom. And I probably used to look like, the last guy who's going to make a mistake when I was coming down. I feel like I've always had that about me. People think I make it look easy, and out of nowhere I capsize, or something dramatic usually would happen on the sort of ladder end of the course. And now I put that down to not catching that moment where I've gassed, and it was likely the respiratory metabolic reflex taken over, and it was like I was so fatigued, I'd kind of lost control of my core, And it was, I was basically rolling the dice every time I raced as to whether I was going to finish the course without a mistake.
Wow, and like that's going to bring up some degree of anxiety. So I think if I get what you're talking about there, when the diaphragm gets tired,
yeah,
it steals blood from the legs, and the legs are going to go from under the
or
individual.
in the arms in my case.
So, but that would bring on some degree of trepidation before the event.
Yes, totally.
Isn't there kind of a comfort in knowing that you've been able to adapt to nasal breathing? Now, I totally get your point. With somebody at your level, you're never expected to have 100% nasal breathing. And I would often say to athletes to say, when you're out there, don't worry about your breathing.
And it's actually detrimental, right? Past a certain point, we need that increased ventilation.
Yes, you do. And, scientists say it's about 35 liters per minute. So that's the volume that you can handle when you're breathing in and out through your nose. But when the intensity ramps up and the minute volume increases beyond that, and it could increase to 100 or even 150 liters per minute. Now, the basis of the individual sustaining nasal breathing is going to depend on nostril size, but also their training. You adapted to it. So you were able to do 85% of your VO2 max with sustaining nasal breathing. It's an interesting adaptation, Can you just kind of progress? So you started, you switched from mouth to nose breathing. It's tough at the start. So you took a bit of a step back. You brought it into your training. Did you bring it into the warm-up? Did you bring it into the normal training that you were doing on the water? Did you bring it into your recovery? So where did you bring it in? That kind of journey in terms of transitioning from being, I would assume that you were a mouth breather, prior to this, especially when it's kind of an intense anaerobic sport.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's exactly how I did it. It was a phased approach. And it's, athletes that I work with now, the first thing, right, is getting this right at rest. It's the most important time anyway, doesn't matter who you are, what sport you're from, you're going to be spending more time resting than you are training. So let's get that right. So yeah, and that was an easy shift for me. That was as simple as becoming aware of it. This is what I've got to do. And I just shut my mouth. Then to get it into the sport, it was a case of I'd start my warm-up with nasal breathing. Where I train at the Whitewater Centre at Lee Valley, we the water's pumped. So the water's pumped up to the start pool and it runs down the channel. And then we have a conveyor belt. It's like a ski lift really, that can take us back up to the top. So the next level was to then, in my recovery periods, so between runs or between sections, I'd come back to my nasal breathing. And otherwise I wouldn't think about it. And then, slowly I started to just try to do it more and more whilst I was actually doing the sport. And I can remember where I was actually when it happened, and I completed a full run kind of at intensity for the first time, and kind of crossed the finish line and was like, pretty sure I just did that whole run, just nasal breathing. And that was a bit of from that point then, it started happening more and more. It's a real belief thing. So I think, certainly the way that I teach this stuff now and my understanding, it's evolved a little bit over the years, as I read more and more about it. And I think I used to believe and used to teach this from a very physiological perspective. And I think now I lead very much with the fact that of breath as a behavior. And actually, rather than trying to, I don't believe we really adapt much physiologically, but more that how we relate emotionally to that sensation of air hunger. And it's a minute difference, right? I know you talk about on the training, we talk a lot about carbon dioxide, but how we don't totally hang the hat on that. And I think it's understanding that it's a minute difference, but I think it does slightly change the way I go about training for it, and how I teach other people as well.
Yeah. So you're saying that there's many influences to your breathing. So one, of course, is the chemical driver to breathe, which is carbon dioxide. And as an athlete, you want to build up a good tolerance to the accumulation of the gas. And secondly, of course, is going to be the diaphragm. You want your diaphragm to function well and to be stronger, because then you're less susceptible to breathlessness. And the third then is the cognitive component.
Yeah.
How well is your brain really adapting to the sensation of air hunger? Can you reduce the perception of breathlessness? It's really interesting, isn't it? Breathing is so complex. It's so simple and so complex at the same time.
It's fascinating, and you know, I'm like I've studied science, and I think that's my nature. I really want to know everything about it. So now, you know, learning more about the brain in terms of breathing has been fascinating for me. But I understand that, you know, for everyone, they don't need to know all this stuff, and actually that like the simple understanding of, you know, knowing that the amount of oxygen in our system, you know, that doesn't change too much, right, as we exercise, but the carbon dioxide, that's something we can manipulate. And that's something that I think, you know, athletes can get on board with and understand with. You know, it's a simple piece of education really to pass that over.
Yes, Adam. And you know, another point is, like, very often people believe that the more air they breathe, the more oxygen that's getting delivered to the working muscles. And of course, that's not how you trained. You trained by switching from mouth to nose breathing. The nose imposes a resistance to your breathing that's about 2 to 3 times that of the mouth. So you were training with underventilation, with restricted breathing.
Yeah.
And at the same time, it doesn't mean that you don't have enough oxygen getting to the working muscles, because if you were to measure your lactate post physical exercise, especially when you've adapted to it, you know, an individual mouth breathing and really pushing it to a high intensity versus an individual nose breathing who's pushing it to a high intensity, once that person has adapted, they're going to be breathing less air. But it doesn't mean that they have less oxygen getting into the working muscles, because their lactate post physical exercise isn't going to be higher. You know, it's sometimes hard to get the head around it.
There's the Dallin paper, isn't there? Is it
Yes.
study where the participants they completed the same distance, didn't they? But the nasal breathing group utilized more oxygen from less breaths.
Correct.
So more, you know, a more efficient way. So yeah, it's and I think what that gives me in my sport, where, you know, that presence, and it's not just about how fast I can go and how hard I can pull, right? It's, you know, it's a skills-based sport at the end of the day. So, you know, being calm and present and alert to what's going on, being able to react, that's really important. The ability to maintain that control in the core. So, you know, when I break down the sport from a breath perspective, you know, I'm aiming to nasal breathe as much as I can. There are moments where, you know, really big turns, or areas where the water is particularly powerful. So where I train at Lee Valley, there's 11 tons of water every second come down that channel. So that, you know, there are moments where I've got to brace. So I've got to create that intra-abdominal pressure with the hold. That is then going to have too much of a build-up. So usually after one of those is a moment where I've just got to get a bit more out. And there's usually 2 or 3 moments during the run for me over that 90, 100 seconds where I feel like I could gas, even now. And I'm just alert to those now. And I think it's a case of, you know, I just take a bigger exhale and then return to nasal breathing as soon as I can.
Presence you spoke of. I absolutely love the field, you know, in terms of the practical application, the experience. And I, like many others and plenty of people listening as well, you know, we spent a lot of time living in our heads, as I did for 25 years, 26 years. I was lucky enough to come into breathing. What's your take on presence? Could you kind of distill it? I'm just so curious, because you're in an event that there's no time to think.
Yeah.
So what helped you to bring that calmness to the mind, that you were kind of immersed in what you're doing?
So I've really tried to simplify what it is that I'm trying to think about in that moment. So for me, it's either my breath or it's where I'm looking. I have visual cues. I don't really plan anything technically anymore. I think that on the day, that last 5 or 10 minutes, that's such a crucial time. And we know that because of the anticipation of the performance, or exercise in general. Have you read I'm sure you have, the Miyamoto paper? And it's
No.
on the pre-anticipation response. Oh,
No,
okay,
but
so
I
this,
will. If you send
yeah,
me
I
the
think it's
link on afterwards.
2022. I'll send it you after, yeah.
Do.
And it's basically shows, they did a study where they had these cyclists and they were told that they were going to cycle at, I think it was like 65% intensity, 75, 85. And their heart rate, respiratory rate, oxygen consumption, the carbon dioxide they're exhaling was all measured in the build-up. And before the exercise even starts, respiratory rate increases, heart rate increases. And they found that the extent to which that happened increased with the perceived how difficult the exercise was going to be. So as they were told it was going to be 95% intensity, then the increase was higher. What they then did was a second part of the study where they were told they were going to perform and they were sat stationary on the bike, and they observed this anticipatory response before the exercise. And they did a second round where they told them they were going to wait 10 minutes because it increased steadily up until that point. And this time they took that away. They said, actually, you're going to start now. So they took away the anticipatory response. And those participants hadn't been hyperventilating before they started. They hadn't dropped their CO2 levels, and they used more oxygen at the start because they maintained slightly higher CO2. So that's something on the day I think is so important for athletes, is managing that last 5 or 10 minutes. And again, this isn't anything complicated. This is just a case of knowing that's going to happen, understanding it's totally normal. When you get on to warm up, when you're waiting to start, if you're not thinking about it, if you let your body take over, your respiratory rate is going to increase, your heart rate is going to increase. And all that's associated with these feelings of anxiety, nervousness. And yeah, I mean, it's no surprise, you throw into the mix the high intensity exercise, the pressure of competition, what the outcomes might mean. It's no wonder most athletes, turn into awful breathers. It becomes this like learned response. So yeah, it's so important to me that I'm managing that, and I've changed my mind on it a little bit. So by around Tokyo time, I was interested in an extended exhale, and I remember sharing that on my Instagram, I think the night before competition. So those watching at home, if you'd like to breathe with me in the start pool, I'm going to be calming myself down. In for 4, out for 6. Extended exhale to calm myself down. Now, that worked for me at the time. I think that with a lot of this stuff, sometimes the breathing technique that works is the one that you believe works. And I really believed in that at the time, so I was happy. I changed my mind on it slightly. I still take control, but I prefer an even inhale-exhale ratio now at that point. And my theory behind this is, when you think of like the ideal performing state for an athlete, there's a lot of these contrasting terms. I want to be energized and calm. I want to be really focused, but also aware and open. So with that in mind, I think, with an inhale, that's more predominantly sympathetic, and an exhale more predominantly parasympathetic. If I want to be in the middle, I want to maintain an even ratio. That's my theory at the moment. And hey, I might change my mind on it again. But that's what I'm doing in that last 5 to 10 minutes, just kind of maintaining that.
It works.
Mm.
That's all that matters.
Yeah.
I think there's a couple of nice points there. The stress levels going into an event, if it's too high, of course, is going to thwart performance.
Yeah.
Because at that point, the body is in a fight or flight response. And the
Mm.
last thing it's going to be wanting to do is to focus on something.
Mm.
And it's kind of weird. We as human beings, the very time that we need our cognitive faculties to be able to hold our attention, we don't have it because we're so stressed out.
Yeah.
And then we have to ask, like, what's the precursor? So that was really interesting. I came across that with music students. So they were about to go into a performance,
Yeah.
and their breathing was monitored just prior to the performance. And breathing started getting faster, a little bit harder, but also irregular.
Yeah.
And the students with the most irregular breathing were the most anxious.
Yeah.
So I suppose it points to one thing, Adam. We don't want to activate a stress response going into an event. It's okay to have a bit of stress. It's very normal, but there's a point at which the stress gets too high. And associated with that is hyperventilation.
Mm.
Now, of course, it's not that the person is necessarily having a panic attack. They could be, but even if your breathing is just a bit faster and a bit harder, that's enough to tip us into a fight or flight response. The heart rate is elevated. So this will really, so you tried 4-6, that would tend to have a more calming effect. But in some studies, it was kind of equal.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And then you went to 5-5. And normally what I do is I don't count. Like I had an instance, I had an interview, I probably spoke about it, but on BBC, and they brought me in at 12 o'clock that day, and I was sitting in the green room, a small little room, till 5 p.m. Now that can bring on some anticipation. And then when I got to the door, they left me standing outside the door for about 5 or 6 minutes. And I could feel my heart rate starting to speed up. And one of the producers or whoever it was there said, Patrick, take a deep breath. And I says, no, I'm not taking any deep breath. But I knew I had to bring down my heart rate.
Yeah.
Because I knew if I didn't, I wasn't going to perform as well as I could do. So I did something similar to you. I was taking the soft breath in through my nose and just a slow, relaxed exhalation, because whatever I wanted to do, I wanted to try and tell my brain that I was safe.
Yeah.
And it's not that I wanted to go in too relaxed. The problem was I was going in too upregulated. So I just wanted to kind of bring it down. So that's what you do. Do you find there's a comfort in knowing that because you've got some control over your state of mind that you can tap into it? Now, I'm going to come back a little bit. Did you just start learning that prior to the event, or did you start bringing it into your everyday life so that when you had the event, it was kind of your default, it would kick in?
Yeah. I mean, this is huge, and this goes for lots of things as well. All mental skills really related to sports. Like, you can't expect, because it's the big day, because it's the Olympic final, you do the extra bits, you do the special stuff, and it's going to work. It has to become part of your DNA. And yeah, I work on this stuff all of the time. There's things that I bring into all my sessions, and in particular, if I'm doing like racing simulation, or just full runs, I'll go through the full race day warm up for that, which that will include, an element of breath holding in there, humming. Actually, when I first get on, I get some weird looks from my competitors. Spend the first 2 minutes in my warm up paddling around humming. And yeah, some breath holds in there, some stronger breath holds actually towards the end as I get closer. And yeah, I do that in training as well. So I know it works. It's practiced, it's routine. Then on the big day, there's all this other stuff going on, particularly Olympic Games, there's 13,000 people there watching. And as a canoe slalom athlete, we're not really used to crowds. It's usually more of a gathering on the riverbank. So this was, it was going to be a new thing. So, I practiced doing this stuff. I'd a lot of visualization. Went and sat myself up there in the start pool, visualized the stands full of people, practiced the breathing technique there, made it familiar. And I felt calm when I was doing it away from the big day, trying to make that sense that when it was the real thing, I've been here before, my body knows it's safe. yeah, I even went to the lengths of practicing with crowd noise blasting in my ears. I found that really useful. But yeah, you know, it's like many things. It's about doing it all of the time. And something I'm quite big on with when I'm teaching others now as well is, you know, I'm trying to get across understanding, and I'm trying to build this into their routines they're already doing. And the idea is that, you know, you get to the point where you don't need a specific breath practice. It doesn't need to take out a different portion of your day. It's you're adding a focus on breath into things you're already doing. And then you're becoming a better breather 24 hours a day.
If you're walking down the road, or if you're driving your car, or if you're doing any sort of activity, do you also tune in on your breath?
Always like counting steps.
What do you mean by counting steps?
So as in I'll be
Breath
counting
hold.
steps, and I'll be
Breath hold walking.
holding my breath, or I'll be, you know, extending it as I go. One thing I've got into recently is, you know, if I'm just at home watching TV, I've got an app on my phone for paced breathing, and I'll set that up in front, and I'll follow this dot coming up and holding and down, and, you know, I'll try and maintain 1 breath per minute for 5 or 10 minutes. You know, I just play around with things like that whilst I'm doing other things, and just, yeah, really kind of build it into the everyday.
In terms of your everyday state of mind, were you a calm individual anyway, or did you find that you would overthink? I'm just kind of, you know, in terms of you, so you started putting breathing exercise into practice. You're bringing your attention to the breath. If the mind wanders, you bring it back. Have you noticed anything in your everyday life that your thinking has changed, or has your overthinking reduced?
I think so, yeah. I think by nature I'm a little bit of an overthinker. So I think it would be, you know, I wouldn't expect that to disappear completely. But yeah, when I think back to where me having a like dysfunctional breathing will have come from, you know, I was a pretty hyperactive kid, very chatty, and you know, I think in its nature, you know, speaking is hyperventilating, right? And it's not really appropriate for the like a state in that moment. You know, you're at rest often and just speaking and hyperventilating, and it becomes a learned behavior, right? I used to have the worst allergies, the worst hay fever anyone I've ever met before. I've once put my back out from sneezing too much. And this was one of the first things, you know, when I started the work, the first summer that came around, it was, my allergies were way better. The next summer I didn't take any medication for it. And that was quite mind-blowing for me. That was probably when it was starting to be like, wow, there's really something in this, and not just from a performance standpoint, like there's something in this for everyone.
So it was when you started doing the breathing exercises, your need for antihistamines or nasal decongestants, you didn't need them.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Using like the nose and blocking exercise, and a few others, like a few of the pressure points, things like that. I use those now, and if I start to notice any congestion, I'm still aware, like I feel like, you know, for sure I'm still allergic to pollen. I'm aware of it when it's in the air, and it's like, you know, I need to take extra care today. And in particular, it's around that speaking. There was someone, I can't remember her name, but which is a shame. If you're listening, reach out because you're really interesting. But she was part of my group when I did my instructor training, and she passed on this cue to us. She was like a speech therapist, and she passed on this cue that has stuck with me ever since. And I always pass it on to people, and it's that when we're speaking, we should have one thought, is one sentence, and that's one breath. And it's a cue to encourage us to speak slower, to pause, to take nasal inhales between sentences. We can hear, you can't unhear it now. When you listen to even the great speakers, people who are paid to do it as a job on TV, radio, literally gasping for air as they speak. So yeah, that was and it can take quite a while to get used to, right?
It's like any behavior we try to change, and I suppose a little bit of talking is fine. It's when somebody is talking all day long and then they realize how exhausted they are at the end of the day talking. School teacher.
These weeks, so at the moment, because I'm back home, just trying to fit in all of the school visits and things, and obviously the podcast now, and I'm speaking at an event later tonight. Some of these, they're more exhausting than training. You look back at the stats, I track heart rates and things like that on Garmin, and it can show high stress, and it's fine. It's fine to go there. We need the stress as well, but it's having that routine, the down regulation after, calming ourselves before. Before I came on the call, I was here a little bit early and just slowing my breath down. Then afterwards, I've got a window before I move on to the next thing. Spend some time down regulating again.
And do you find it easy? Because a lot of people, maybe 30, well, I'm 51, so I suppose there's a 20-year age gap. I would expect a lot of youngsters to be just, when they get bored, they look straight into their phone. So obviously, have you kind of managed that habit? Have you swapped looking at your phone, scrolling, versus breathing?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what it is. I think paying more attention to my breath, seeing it as an important thing, it was a bit of a gateway into other aspects of health. So, it would make me want to be more present, use my phone less, eat better food. It's not just about the breathing anymore. And I think the breathing is related to all of them. If I'm calmer, I'm likely to make a better decision. If I'm focused on my breathing, if I'm breathing calmly, I'm way less likely to just be distracted by the next shiny thing, to actually make a decision myself of how I want to spend my time. So yeah, I mean, like everyone, my phone is there and I can get dragged into it at times. One of the best things I ever did, in respect to that. So, I think we're getting interested in breath, inevitably you get interested in sleep, stress, these things, but plugging my phone in downstairs an hour and a half before I want to go to bed, not picking it up first thing in the morning, again, leaving it an hour and a half. Those kind of habits are life-changing, I think. When I first started doing that, that became my favorite time of day. That was 3 hours of no one can contact me. That's my time. And yeah, I think it then helps you to kind of, you don't get that itch as much throughout the day to pick it up.
Totally. Oh no, it's really good to give ourselves some attention. We are craving attention, and normally we're putting all of our attention out, and the phone is designed to steal our attention. Of course, and the reason being is because of the multinational companies behind it. They make a lot of money from our attention. So I don't want to give them my 2 hours a day. I would rather give it to myself. But it's good you came across that. Your sleep. So you said that your sleep is better. Can you go through why is it important for you? What do you do and how has it changed?
Yeah, so yeah, I mean, it was one of the first things I tried actually when I started with improving my breathing, was to try taking my mouth shut at night. And I remember feeling a little bit anxious about trying it. It was only your book, really, at the time. There wasn't really aware of many instructors. I mean, now it's everywhere, right? And every other person's got a brand of tape they're trying to sell you. Hostage tape. I mean, come on, that's awful.
Yeah, well, we want to try and make it mainstream in terms of our own one as Myo tape.
Yeah.
I don't know if you know it, the one that goes around.
Yeah, I've seen this one as well.
I think it's really important, and I kind of something that's so important, not to wake up with a dry mouth in the morning, you know. And of course, we do need to establish that the person can actually breathe through their nose. But safety is important.
Yeah,
It really,
yeah.
really
So
is. Yeah.
what I did was, I think I was quite intuitive with it, because it's exactly, how I would explain to people now is I put it on early before bed, sort of, 30 minutes before. So I'll just walk around the house with it and see how it feels. And by that point, I realized that I was fine. I didn't need to open my mouth. So I was like, okay, I'll be fine to sleep. But there was an element of like, am I going to die? Is this going to be okay? And yeah, I think, if anyone was interested in trying it, then to, yeah, like just try it at rest, like whilst you're awake, to see first. And also, I think sleeping position is quite important. I think, we're way more likely for the mouth to open if we're on our back, for the jaw to fall back. So if we're on our side, that can make it easier. I can't speak for everyone, but I know that for me, when I'm on my right-hand side, I feel like my breathing is easier. I feel like I notice I'm more dominant on this left side, which I know is more associated with a restful state. So I tend to sleep that way. But yeah, the first time I did it, I didn't think I had a sleep problem. And the first time I did it, I woke up
How did you
for my
used to
alarm.
wake up?
I
So
think I
prior
used to
to
wake
it,
up with that dry mouth, sore throat. I think was quite a common thing for me.
were you alert when you
No,
had your mouth
no,
open?
no. And to be honest, I'm still not a morning person by any
Mm.
stretch of the imagination. I love my sleep. But the first time I did it, I woke up before my alarm. I felt refreshed, and I was like, wow, have I never really slept before until now? It was really quite eye-opening for me, and yeah, I mean, I've done it ever since. I'm confident that I've had significant adaptation to nasal breathing, but for me, I feel like there's always a few things that could trigger it to start going backwards, and I just don't want that to happen. I've noticed that if you eat too close to going to bed, or eat a very big meal, alcohol for sure is a major one. Going to bed when you're already like really tired, struggling to keep your eyes open and going to bed. These are all things that for me, I think can trigger the mouth to open during the night. So it's by my bed. It's there, it takes 2 seconds, and yeah, I don't know if it's a bit of routine now as well. It's almost like a Pavlov's dog response. The tape goes on before bed. As like a sign to the brain that now's the time to sleep. So yeah,
that's it. It's a trigger. As soon as you put it on, you feel sleepy.
Yeah,
it's amazing too. It's something that's very, very simple. I know it's the same myself because I was a chronic mouth breather, and I'm not surprised as well when you were talking about hay fever. If you have a stuffy nose as a kid growing up, even if it's just seasonal, that could be enough that you switch to mouth breathing because you don't feel comfortable breathing through your nose. And of course, then it's not just that there's a physiological issue in terms of a stuffy nose, you also have a behavioral issue in terms of the mouth breathing.
Yeah.
And mouth breathing then is going to cause faster breathing, upper chest breathing. And then when you bring that into physical exercise, it's likely that your breathing is going to be faster and harder relative to your exercise. And that was traumatizing the upper airways, which was causing constriction. So other people will have exercise-induced asthma or exercise-induced bronchoconstriction, that the lower airways are impacted. So yeah, so it's quite amazing the different connections. So we started off talking about your win and switching to nasal breathing, and then from a health point of view, from a state of mind, from a state of sleep, but it's all performance.
Yeah.
Isn't it? It's all kind of tied in. It's a little bit of an increment in each area that feeds into the entire picture.
Totally. I mean, at my level of sport, we're looking for the fractions of a percent, right? And it all feeds in. And if I'm healthier, I believe that's going to make me a better athlete.
Totally. Do you work with people, or I know you're a full-time athlete
Yeah,
and
yeah. No, I
professional
do. I
athlete?
work with people. So So I call my business Inspired Breath Academy.
Great.
So that's very much that inspired headline is, that's like the athlete archetype. My brand is in gold, these gold lungs. And I very much see that as my role in this space, primarily is about inspiring an interest in the field of breath work, or in the field of breath science. I'm a bit funny about the term breath work.
I'm too.
Yeah. And but yeah, no, I work one-to-one. I have very limited capacity. I get very invested in who I work with. I like to work one-to-one. I have clients commit to 8 sessions with me, and we try to do that over about 8 to 12 weeks. I like to, see that progression, see that change. I'm less interested in kind of one-offs. I think because I have such limited capacity, then I'm only really keen to work with people that are going to be invested and want to see real transformation. Obviously, most of the work I get is sports related, but I'm really passionate and always interested if I get someone that comes with something more clinical. And we'll have a bit of a discovery call. If I feel like I can help, then I get involved, and almost especially if it's something new for me, it's something, almost from a little bit of a selfish perspective as well. It's something else for me to dive into the literature about and learn some more. But yeah, getting some great results, and yeah, I'm really excited for the future. I'm trying to build this business alongside so that I've got something to step into when I finish my sport, but also run it alongside. And as well as the one-to-ones, I have a corporate workshop that I go and teach. And I think I'm going to start to do some work with teams as well. I was trying to keep things very simple, 2 products, one-to-one corporate workshop. And then I started getting all these approaches from teams. And I'm like, go where the work is. I've got to focus on this. And it's where my expertise
Totally,
is,
Adam.
right?
And the other
As
thing
an athlete.
is, if you can work with 15 people for the same time as working, when your time is limited,
Yeah.
and I think it's really applicable to teams. Because you can incorporate into the warm-up, you can incorporate the recovery, you can incorporate sleep, you can get them out of their heads, you can improve their mental focus, their performance, and also then when they're in the gym.
Yeah.
How many athletes go to the gym, they may be training alone, they're just going through the motions, and their attention is elsewhere. Their mouth is open. And here you were talking about, was it you or somebody else? I was talking to somebody else this morning now, so I'm confused. But in terms of making it accessible and bringing it into your normal everyday life. So if you are going to the gym, if you're on a treadmill or whatever, you're on a cross train or whatever you're doing, that it's also a training for your breathing and it's a training for the brain. So by all else, definitely bring it into teams. I think it's huge. And you know what? Sometimes it's fun. Like it's just the energy of working with a group of individuals can be pretty cool. Yeah. So there's definitely that.
Making it fun. I think you're right. I've been having this conversation with a few people lately. I think because it is, it's the science and all of that I'm interested in, and it can get quite serious. And there's been an
that's
element
always
of that now, is of trying to bring a bit of fun back into it, a bit of curiosity. And I think there's certainly been times where I've been a little bit closed off to, trying, certain things with breathing that I didn't understand as much. And I think, the more I develop, the more interested I am and curious about other things. So, also like not being closed off to these hyperventilation practices, because, there is a place for it. It's not an everyday breathing thing, but, I know some great teachers. I'm part of a study group with some teachers who their journey started with conscious connected. And then they've trained in other methods as well. And so it's been fascinating actually. My thing at the moment is IMT, so inspiratory muscle training, getting interested in that, doing a little bit of work with the Power Breathe device. And I'm currently kind of just building a bank of data right now, but I'm interested to see if I can use it as a marker for like training readiness. So in the morning, if that score's a little low, then I know, I can't push it quite so hard today, and we can monitor and adjust volume kind of based on that. I'm not sure how that's going to go at the moment, because it's new to me. My score is kind of steadily rising, but once that plateaus off, I feel like that could be an interesting marker for me. But yeah, that's something I think I'll introduce to people kind of towards the end of working together, like focusing on mechanics first, and then a bit more about their relationship to air hunger. And then this is kind of like the icing on the cake, the top level stuff, if they want to just get those extra gains.
And the carbon dioxide, of course, as well.
Of course, yeah.
Great stuff. I'm going to bring it to a close. I'm just conscious of time, so it's about 60 minutes or so. And it's been a pleasure talking to you. If somebody is wanting to bring breathing into their life, so say somebody who's just come across our conversation here, what would you say to them? Where would they start?
I think, reading the Oxygen Advantage book is a pretty good place to start. Get online, have a little look. There's so much out there. There's so many great teachers out there now. You can follow me. I'm at slalom_Burgess. And my website's Inspired Breath Academy. And I think be curious about it. That's the primary thing at the moment. Close your mouth, see how you feel. Go for a walk, go for a run, keep your mouth closed, see how that feels. These are kind of really good starting points. And I think, it's just a fascinating field to get into. So there's so much information out there right now: podcasts, YouTube, books. That's kind of where I'd start.
It's huge, and it's really growing. It's thriving at the moment, and I still think we're at very early stages. I would make a prediction in the next 5 years, nose breathing and breath holding and everything that we are doing as part of Oxygen Advantage is going to be embedded in sports.
Totally.
And the science is going to start catching up. So it's only a matter of time, Adam. And I think you're one of the innovators, so many athletes will follow behind you. So listen, thanks very much. Great conversation.
Cool. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Oxygen Advantage podcast. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe and maybe take the time to leave us a review. The Oxygen Advantage podcast is available from all your podcast providers.